Leanne, and thanks everyone for coming back from lunch. It's always a good slot, isn't it, this post-lunch one? But first of all, I want to start and thank Pika for the opportunity to speak today and present to you guys, and also to be part of the Foundational Symposium. As a presenter, I've also enjoyed all the talks so far and have gotten a lot out of it already for my own personal practice, so that's wonderful. So a little bit about me to start. I am a mixed reality designer, producer and artist. My background includes, way back, a Bachelor of Science degree where I majored in psychology and anthropology, as well as 15 years working in digital media, so including websites, so mobile application, user experience and content production. And in 2017, I transitioned into the world of extended reality, founding my own company, Voyant Augmented Reality, which is a Fremantle-based studio designing and creating bespoke augmented reality experiences specifically for creative industries. And I've since had the pleasure of working with a number of amazing artists, including JC, as well as festivals, galleries, and other creative organisations on mixed reality projects. And this year is an exciting new for me as well, as I'll be producing and leading the narrative design of a mixed reality game for the Quest 3. I also contribute to several advisory committees, including Chair of Immersive Australia, which is a national organisation for people who are interested in working in extended reality technologies. So I really recommend that you look that up if you're interested in like collaborating and connecting, especially with people who have those kinds of technical skill sets. I am previously involved in Screen West Industry Advisory Group, the WA Games Week Committee and Design Frio. And personally, I love working at the intersection of story, design and technology. So today I'm talking about augmented reality and mixed reality, but my goal is hopefully to impart a bit more technical knowledge and practical advice by stepping you through an actual project that I worked on as a producer and designer in collaboration with an artist and a 3D modeler and animator, and to hopefully bring to life some of those points and challenges and how you can overcome them with your own future projects. So I thought it would be useful, perhaps for those of you who are new to immersive technologies, is to run through some idea of definitions. So one is narrative design, which I feel like artists do anyway. And there's a lot of, as with definitions, they always evolve over time depending on who you ask, but I thought this one was quite good from Macquarie University. Narrative design is not just plotting or writing a story, but is the creation of what a story looks like, what narrative tools will be employed in telling the story, or how an audience will perceive the story. Narrative theory, or narratology, is a process of understanding how these narratives and their designs are perceived by their audiences. Narrative theory and narrative design are crucial to all humanities subjects. Narratology is used throughout subjects such as teaching, literature, anthropology and history, often with a focus on deconstructing pre-existing narratives to find further meaning within them. That's a lot of words, so I have my own working definition, which is just narrative design is creating a world and telling a story with the tools and language that are native to that medium. And I think that's important when looking at the context of spatial design or working with immersive technologies, because it is different. It is different from working with 2D mediums and what you may have worked with before, and understanding that broader context is really important when working in this space. And another kind of definition to understand really is what's widely touted as the extended reality spectrum. So you have physical reality on one side, IRL. On the other end of the spectrum, you have virtual reality. So I think most, actually have a show of hands of who has, put on that virtual reality headset. Okay, that was not the case like 5 years ago, if you asked that question, so that's really good. So you're familiar with the fact that virtual reality is a completely 100% virtual environment. So everything you see, hear, and interact with is digital or virtual. And then augmented reality has tended to sit in the middle of that, and what most people have experienced with augmented reality is through a mobile device like an iPad or a phone. But I think that as the technology has advanced in the last 5 to 7 years, the term mixed reality has come up, and people are saying to me, well, isn't that just augmented reality? Like, where does that fit in the spectrum? So I haven't seen anyone else do this in terms of an approach, but I've sort of workshopping this idea of an extended reality matrix. So the other dimension, the axis that I wanted to include on that was the idea of physical interaction and how that relates to virtual inputs, because that differs greatly between AR and mixed reality and virtual reality. So you can see, early examples of AR were things like the pilot heads-up display, or the Terminator could see in that heads-up virtual field. Like, there wasn't really that much understanding of like spatial mapping or the 3D space around them. It was just kind of like, I can see an object and I can name it, but it's pretty static on the screen in front of you. A lot of you who have travelled, you probably use things like Google Translate, but maybe not use that feature which is using image recognition, where you can put it onto a packet of food that's written in a different language and it will actually serve up the English content overlaid on that exact object. So in that way, it's augmenting your vision and augmenting your understanding of the world around you. Then there's things like face filters, that you see on Snapchat, that is using facial recognition to, overlay a virtual or augmented view of your face. And obviously with the mobile devices, Pokemon Go, which JC mentioned, is starting to have a little bit more understanding and contextual awareness, because it's understanding your location and using GPS and giving you more context of the world that you can see around you. And mixed reality sits in between that and virtual reality, because you can overlay virtual assets over the physical world. And that's a game changer, because you can interact with people, like you can see them. You can walk around a room and not worry that you're going to trip over something or walk into a wall like you do in virtual reality. And you can interact with those virtual objects just like you would in VR. And another way of looking at this matrix is understanding that something like 360 video is lower on that interaction spectrum, because you're in what we call a 3DOF, like 3 degrees of freedom, because you can only just move your head in that space. Whereas in virtual reality experiences, you would be able to use your hands and walk around, and that's 6 degrees of freedom. So it's not like anything's like better or worse in terms of an experience. It's really up to you as a creator to decide what the intent is of the experience and how much interaction you want to have and what is applicable for that kind of experience. So I thought that was useful to set the scene before I delve into the ins and outs of this project. So I'll just play a little video, hopefully it works.
And play, so yeah.
Okay, so this work was commissioned as part of the BLEED Festival, BLEED standing for Biennial Live Event in the Everyday Digital, and it featured contemporary arts commissions across multiple in real life and digital platforms. And in 2002, BLEED took place across 3 cities, online and in person, from the 29th of August to the 25th of September. And then that year they considered the potential and problems of borders. They explored the sites of intersection between and within humans, technology, media, history and nationhood, and our emotional, physical and digital geographies. So the festival was conceived by Campbelltown City Council through the Campbelltown Arts Centre and the City of Melbourne. And in 2020, 2022, they commissioned 3 artists: Endless Blue Edge by Jodie Wallen, Sap by Chun Yin Rainbow Chan, and You Can Never Touch Your Shadow by Dean Cross. And that was the work that I collaborated on. So in terms of collaborators, I want to shout out for the Campbelltown Arts Centre for their assistance and obviously in commissioning this project. They're one of the leading arts and cultural institutions in Western Sydney, and they originally approached me to be involved because of my background working in augmented reality, because at that time one of their artists, Dean, was conceiving a work with AR, and specifically he had a very ambitious idea of a 3D wedge-tail eagle that he wanted to trigger via a QR code. And he didn't really know if this was feasible, but that was his goal, and so they tried to connect him with someone who might be able to bring that to life. And more about Dean, he's an amazing artist, and he had the original vision for this project. He was born and raised on Ngunnawal Ngambirri country and a Worimi man through his paternal bloodline, and I'm just going to read his bio from his website. He's a paratactical artist interested in collisions of materials, ideas and histories. He is motivated by the understanding that this practice sits within a continuum of the oldest living culture on Earth and enacts First Nation sovereignty through expanded contemporary art methodologies. He hopes to traverse the poetic and the political in a nuanced choreography of form and ideas. He has exhibited widely across the Australian continent and beyond, and his work is held by major institutions including the Art Gallery of South Australia, the National Gallery of Victoria, the Hyde Museum and the Powerhouse Museum. And I recommend going to his website and checking out his other work as well. And Lisa Rai was the 3D artist and animator working on this project, and she's an incredibly talented multimedia and games artist who's based here in Perth, WA. She's worked on a number of video games, conceptual art, animation and virtual reality projects, so I actually reached out to her to be involved in this project because I had the pleasure of meeting and working with her previously on the Pika XR Hackathon in 2021. So it's very interesting to see how many circles overlap in Perth in terms of experience and projects. And as she says here in this quote, she loves the challenges that new genres, technologies and art styles bring to each project. So we had the team, we had the commission, and where to start. So we had some interesting challenges to begin with, one of which was that we were working remotely with Dean. So Dean's on the East Coast and Lisa and I were here in Perth. And so we had to quickly establish how we were going to work together. And one of the advantages of having worked in the game space or with technology in general is that you get used to working with things like online repositories and sharing drives and things like that. And we introduced Dean to Discord. So for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like Slack, but it's very popular with gamers, and it just allows you to have discussions and share materials and links. And it was actually super helpful, even for me preparing for this presentation, because our channel was still live, so I could go back and have a look at our conversations and the documentation and some of the screenshots that we shared during the work on the project. But in the early stages of the project, we tried to get what was in Dean's head in terms of his original vision and concept and what he wanted to share, and try to create materials that we could share, whether it was images or YouTube videos, so that we could understand what he was trying to achieve with this. And his main vision centred around a family of wedge-tailed eagles that lived on country, and the special connection that he had to them, and how he wanted to explore and share that through digital means, and specifically augmented reality. And Lisa fortuitously revealed that she had just happened to have modelled a 3D bust of an eagle previously. So we thought that that was a very fortuitous early sign for our project that we were meant to work together. And obviously there were constraints around, we had the budget, we knew when the exhibition had to be live, and the overall concept and vision. So my job as producer and designer was trying to also have a common medium to understand how it was going to play out in real life in the exhibition space, so that we can involve Campbelltown Arts Centre to put the exhibition or what it looked like together in person. So I like to create mock-ups like this to kind of demonstrate how things would look and how it would feel from a user experience perspective. Because one thing that I've learned is that you can't make any assumptions about where people put things or place things. So after this, there are actually some printed images on the tables outside that are QR codes. And one of the things that we discovered is that we wouldn't be able to put them up on a gallery wall because it would the images would be vertical, and the technology we're exploring was horizontal plane tracking. So it actually needs to focus on a flat surface to be able to trigger the image. Otherwise, the eagle would be orientated the wrong way or be really, in technical talk, janky. So I tried to demonstrate that, like, having it, sit like that, it would need something to rest on, and then what's it going to rest on? A branch, it has to be narratively intact to the story, so that presented problems. So then another challenge that we had was, remember, this experience was supposed to be accessible by people remotely as well, so at home, who weren't in the gallery space. So how was it going to work for them? How were they going to access the content and be triggered by the QR code and have instructions on how to use that experience? So we actually had 2 audiences to serve in this instance. So that was fun to work through. So after many discussions and also showing how other experiences worked, because Dean was new to AR, so I sent him a few links and other QR codes so he could see how that experience could work. We decided on the idea of having it on a table or a plinth, this image that he wanted, and then the eagle would spawn in front of the person and then fly around the room and then come back to the same space. So those are really 4 simple diagrams, but they encapsulated the essence of what the experience was, so that I knew what I was building, Lisa knew what she was building and how she was going to build it, and Dean was happy that that was the correct interpretation of what he wanted from this experience. So in terms of development, this is going to be relevant to any technology that you might want to play around with. So it's a bit chunky, I will let you know in advance. So hardware and audience access. You have to consider, how will the audience access the experience, and is specific hardware required? Sometimes an artist may want to experiment with a specific hardware or technology, and that will shape the questions and the decisions that come after. Other times, it's the experience that takes place first, and then the journey is about finding what technology will serve that idea or that interest. And in this case, that was easy because Dean had already decided that he definitely wanted to use augmented reality. So we didn't have to explore VR, we didn't have to explore anything else. It was just like, what are the options that he could utilise in AR? See, I've worked with technology so much that I rely on a piece of paper because I just don't want things to go wrong. So that's why my notes are here. Sometimes an experience also needs to be available on multiple types of hardware. So for example, like a mixed reality experience could be developed for one type of headset, like the Quest 3, or if you know it needs to be available across different kinds of headsets, like a Quest 2 or an HTC Vive, that is going to impact greatly how you develop that experience from the beginning. Yes?
What headsets out of the 2 and the 3 and the Hive would you go for in developing?
That's an excellent question. So, Quest 2 only has black and white pass-through, and it's not as high fidelity. Quest 3 is a later model, so obviously, the displays and everything are better quality, and it's colour, so I think that's a better experience. There's things like the Apple Vision Pro, but at a $6,000 price point. I don't know who's developing for it, I'm not. But I think that part of the discussion about what's best, I can't say because it depends on the project, and who's going to access it. Because when you talk about access, it's not just you as a developer having to purchase that hardware or and then develop for it. It's also your audience. Like, does your audience, have a Quest 3 at home? If so, that's great. You can develop for them. But if they don't, then that might be an investment that the creative institution that you're working with has to make, and then they have to factor that in. Like, do they have enough content to justify that investment? So, yeah. Which goes into the idea of budget to purchase the hardware, opportunities to use it in future. Mobile development at that time, 2022, was very popular for AR, so that was a good option for me to suggest to Dean. But you also have to consider for mobile development whether it's going to be available on both iOS and Android versions. If both, then you need to make builds for both. So that's just another thing to think about. And also testing, like, do you have those devices available? Will you go through the process of testing it across the different devices that you're making it available? The wider context in this instance is things like how long will the exhibition be showcased for, and is it going to be shown again in the future? Because then you're going to have to think about things like how is the experience archived, and is it going to be maintained? So anyone that's worked with technology knows that, you know, just you're one operating system version away from everything breaking. So that's something to, you know, factor into whether you're going to, is this part of like a long-term investment that you as a creative person are making into your learning journey, and you want to, you know, keep experimenting, or is this something that you just sort of want to dip in your toes and then decide whether you want to make that investment long-term? Development cost and publishing cost. So there's, separate to the hardware, is the kind of software that you're going to be using to build. So things like Unity and Unreal are game engines that are used for a lot of 3D spatial experiences, but they require licenses sometimes or assets. And even for mobile development, you're going to need like an Apple developer license. So I hope this doesn't put you off. Like, I'm just trying to give you the realistic things that you have to consider when working with technology, which is really important if you're new. And that's why it is important to collaborate early on with people who know this stuff, because it will just save you, even just 1 or 2 conversations will save you a lot of heartache down the road, because you can just make decisions in that fork of the road that will suit you and your practice a lot better. And exhibition facilitation, that's a big one in terms of what will be required to showcase the experience. So you'll see throughout the Foundational Symposium, you know, people have got quests set up, and some of them have people standing by to facilitate them, to show people who are new to VR how to put the headset on, how to adjust it. And those people may or may not be you, so then if it's somebody else, you'll need to train that person. You need to provide documentation or some kind of cheat sheet, troubleshooting, what happens when it goes wrong. You know, sometimes it is a matter of turning on and off again, but sometimes you might need to be on hand to answer those questions or facilitate it. And the last thing, which I think is really important too when selecting a technology platform, is the future potential for your own learning and development. Like, is there enough resources and support and documentation that you can use? As JC said, you know, if you're willing to dip your toe in there, can you further your own development with a bit of support from other people, or completely on your own? And another good segue from JC's presentation is that we also used Eighth Wall. It's originally Eighth Wall, but it got bought out by Niantic, who, interestingly enough, are the guys who made Pokemon Go. So they are very well versed in augmented reality, especially for mobile devices, and also introducing GPS and location-based experiences as well. And the reason why I recommended it, and we had discussions between Dean and Lisa and myself about why. So again, covering those tips that I mentioned from the previous slide, in terms of hardware and audience access, it's actually web-based. So it just opens up a web browser on your phone, and everybody has a web browser on their mobile device. So it means that in terms of audience access, as long as someone had a mobile device, they could access this experience, and it could be triggered by a QR code. The wider context was, I did suggest to Dean at that time that it was possible to create a social media AR experiences through things like Snapchat, Facebook and Instagram. But when he heard Facebook, he was like, no, I don't want to be associated with that. I mean, the benefit is that they did at that time have this thing called Meta Spark Studio, which was similar to Eighth Wall, and it allowed you to create these experiences. But it was a free platform, which is great, but they turned it off last year. And, you know, just almost overnight. And so that's the risk as well, like when you're trying to figure out what platforms to invest in and what to learn. you have to take that into account. Yes, JC?
So the other thing that I found with the AIDS memorial, and we had this conversation, was that you had to have Instagram or Facebook to be able to access. And that was one of the choices that we talked about with the AIDS memorial, was knowing that only people with Instagram or, well, it's just Instagram, I think.
Yeah, it was a smaller pool.
Yeah.
And it depends on the audience as well, because you were interested, if I recall correctly, in engaging with a younger queer community.
Yeah,
So being on
it's about-
Instagram, it was a good thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was a trade-off. But that platform's not available
Yeah,
anymore.
we turned it off and we had to move it somewhere else.
Yeah. And at that time it was free for a lot of options, but now they seem to have gated some of the content or features. So it's like a freemium model, you know, you get some free, but then you have to pay for other applications. In terms of development cost and publishing, as I said, it was free at that time. They also, in terms of testing, the other thing that was great is that we all had mobile devices. So Dean could test it from where he was, we could test it here in Perth, and then the guys at the Campbelltown Arts Centre could also test it. So that made it super easy for us to collaborate remotely. Their platform also works on both iOS and Android devices. So we didn't have to do all the heavy lifting, because if we made a custom platform, which I have done in the past, make a custom app, you have to go and test multiple operating versions, multiple devices, and you know how many Android devices there are. You can't possibly test all of them. But then someone inevitably will go, I'm running Android 7 on this Nexus thing from 10 years ago and it doesn't work. So it does take out the heavy lifting in terms of testing and things like that. In terms of exhibition facilitation, there was no requirement for specialist hardware because people just bring their own device, and there was no requirement for staff or training because everyone knows how to open a QR code and have the experience go. And in terms of future potential for learning and development, it's really relatively easy to get started, and there's documentation and video tutorials available online. So on to Lisa's amazing work, which is actually creating the 3D model. You can buy a lot of assets online. There are many libraries online of 3D assets and animations and things, but it's such a different experience when you work with someone who can create something from scratch, and that's what Lisa did. So with discussions with Dean and from using reference images, she really nailed and Dean was super happy with the model and the look of the eagle, and he even made comments like, the brow is too serious and it looks too fierce, so like, can you open that up so it looks more, friendly, and she did that, and you can't necessarily do that very easily with a model that you just download for $5 online. And she, I have the notes, and she did that in Maya. She did that in Maya when she made that 3D model. In terms of the look and the colouring and the texture, she did all that in Substance Painter, and she used ZBrush for the sculpting, for those who are taking notes. And Dean also specified that he wanted something quite realistic looking, because it was imaged, it was referencing a real wedge-tailed eagle family in the real world, so he didn't want something too abstract or too stylised. And Lisa also had to make sure that the polygon count and the texture maps were really small, because working in AR, you need to make sure that the overall file size is quite small, because it's running in real time on mobile devices, and so keeping everything really as small as possible is ideal. But of course the other trade-off is how realistic, it looks, and so she was able to navigate that amazingly. And we could also test things by bringing the early models into Niantic Studio and Blender, just to see how it's looking. Sorry, the question.
With this polygon count conundrum, I guess, if you have a larger polygon count object or things, so do you have to then go to like virtual reality headsets to render them, or is there limits to those as well?
It's more, virtual reality also benefits, I mean that's not my expertise, but my understanding is that it does benefit from having lower files. So ideally what people try to do is they not cheat, but they put the detail of the model not in the 3D structure, but in the texture map that overlays and wraps over the image. So because it's also performing in real time in virtual reality, and so it's a performance cost. as it's running. So that's when it starts to get jittery or, you know, things shake, and in both VR and AR.
Okay, cool, thank you.
No problem. And this is what rigging looks like. So when you have a 3D model, to make it move, you actually need to put all these little points, almost like recreating a skeletal structure for how the arms are like going to articulate and how the neck moves and things like that. And so, and she did that to mimic the way that the bird moves. And this is a short little early test that she did. So every time we made a little change or something, we would send a little clip like that to Dean so that he could see what it looked like. And then when the model was ready, we imported it into the Niantic studio. And so I was the developer on this project, and I can tell you that back in 2022, it was all code. There was no graphical user interface, so it did not look this pretty. I'm just going to flick. That's what it looked like. That's how what I had to look at to make sure that it looked right, that the shadows were placed, and I did so much testing. But now Niantic have released this beautiful graphical user interface, which mimics a lot of what Unreal and Unity looks like these days. And so, and it even has like this great simulator player, so you can even play and test it and see what the animation looks like. And some of the technical details about this project is that it used, as I mentioned earlier, like horizontal plane detection and tracking, so it was anchored in the real world space. Other kinds of AR experiences might track a poster. You might have seen those. And so when you hold your phone up against a poster, it kind of comes to life and stuff. But the experience is really locked to that that space, and so we wanted the eagle to fly around the room. So the only way we could do that is make sure it was tracking on a horizontal plane. We had to make sure that it was exported from Lisa's wonderful software into a file type that was accepted into this studio. So that's another thing. If you want to explore downloading assets online from a library, make sure they're available in the file type that you need to work in, because it's really hard to export it if you don't have that tech background. And then we did, funky things with the lighting and shadows and stuff. It's a JavaScript API for anyone that is wondering, and it also allowed us to have a landing page so that when people opened up the experience, they would have this beautiful image from Dean's country, and you entered the experience before it started. So this is what the physical environment was, because remember, we were all remote, so even Dean wasn't on site at Campbelltown Arts Centre, so we got photographs from the festival organisers about how it looked. And we didn't realise until halfway through that the room was going to be completely black. It's just one of those assumptions that you think, oh, it's a gallery, it's going to have white walls, but no, it was completely black. And so we had to make sure we played around with some of the textures on the eagle so it was visible, so we made it brighter so it would stand out from the black walls. And things to do with the lighting. And when you experience it outside, I just ask you to bear that in mind, that this experience was custom made for this environment. So I did 2 tests. At one time the eagle was massive, and one time it was small. So it's not made for the room next door. The other thing that I should point out is that even in preparing the demo for today's Foundational Symposium, I actually had to spend quite a bit of time because the platform had changed a lot and some links had broken and things didn't work. So that's just the reality of working with tech sometimes. As I said, the other technical requirement was remote access. So again, I mapped out what the experience looked like in that top row for someone who was in situ on site at the Campbelltown Arts Centre, but then married this up with what the online experience was going to look like for them at home, and making sure all the URLs worked, working with the IT guys at Campbelltown Arts Centre to make sure that the URL was live and connected with the QR code. Because it was also done in conjunction with the Taipei Arts Centre, we also had to ensure that Mandarin users had translation live on their phone to be able to, it was just for the simple accepting permissions, like can we access your microphone and your camera to enable this AR experience, but we had to include that as well. And Dean made the tattoo. He printed out the QR code that I created and did it as a digital tattoo, just printed out on temporary temporary tattoo and printed it at home. And I mentioned to him that he would need to have a dynamic code. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with QR codes, but you can find like many websites online that will just spit out a free QR code. But I always recommend go with a dynamic one, because if you want to change the link of where it points to, but you've already fabricated that QR code on a sheet of metal and it costs you, you know, a couple of $100, you won't be able to update that if it's not a dynamic code. So that's a big tip that will hopefully save you in the future. The other thing that Dean wanted was to print it on metal, and so we had to do a lot of testing, because sometimes the reflections of the light on metal will affect the tracking on the camera. So that was another thing that the Campbelltown guys helped to test and send videos of to see how that worked, but it worked pretty well because they could play around with the spotlight. So to make sure that when someone was standing directly in front of the plinth, they didn't have a massive, you know, glare shining into their camera or their face. And yeah, like, as if I haven't reiterated enough, it's testing, testing, patience, and more testing. So, you know, I'd go to cafes around the place in Frio and, like, you know, test it out, see what that lighting was like, or do it at home. And Dean and Lisa did the same, just to make sure that it was as robust as possible, given that we weren't, you know, on site to be able to make any changes. So this is the work. And I'm just going to read the description as written by Dean. You can never touch your shadow. The distinction between physical and digital objects and places are blurred in the on-site component of You Can Never Touch Your Shadow at Campbelltown Arts Centre. The artist Dean Cross brings together three mediums, one still image, one moving image, and an augmented reality sculpture. The augmented reality sculpture of the wedge-tailed eagle is the keystone to the experience of the work. This AR world is accessed through an image of a QR code temporary tattoo on the artist's body, linking the digital world to the physical and the eagle to the artist. The eagle is animated to evade the viewer as it moves through Campbelltown Arts Centre. The eagle is only visible through the digital lens of a camera on a personal device, yet when it exits within and interacts with the IRL world, the intangible nature of the digitally rendered object is almost forgotten. The still image and AR sculpture are accompanied by a video work that considers edges, boundaries, borders, and displacement. This new video work commissioned for Bleed is an evolution of the work Right Lands, which was initially conceived and presented in 2015. 7 years later, Dean Cross will retrace the steps he walked in the original video, traversing the northern, southern, eastern, and western boundaries of the artist's family farm on the Ngunnawal country, the place where over years he has connected with the family of wedge-tailed eagles, which have inspired this work. How am I going for time?
You've got about 20 minutes actually.
Okay.
Because we started 5 minutes late.
Okay. And yeah, this is the final room, so you can see the plinth at the bottom of the screen, and then the display that's hung up, suspended from the ceiling, which features 4 moving video works at the same time. And I'll just play the video work. And you'll notice that in that room there was no physical obstructions. So we made sure that we had a big open space so people could walk around and they weren't going to accidentally like walk into a pole or trip over wires or anything like that. And then this is wedge-tailed eagle. There's a bit of tension to the camera, don't I? I'll try to back it up a bit.
Press play.
So there's no audio. It was entirely possible to have some kind of audio or sound, but I think Dean wanted to not interrupt the rest of the experience in terms of looking up at the sky. Black room. Comes right back to the same spot. It's very satisfying to see. So from my perspectives of the work, I think Dean's vision and final work skillfully invites the audience to engage with a work that really blends the physical and the digital. Like the plinth is spotlighted within a dark room, so as soon as you came into that room, you instantly were, led towards it. And I love that, like, this is my favourite photo from the exhibition where the two kids are sort of like looking up at the sky at the same time, because from this image, you don't know what they're looking at, right? It's virtual. So you have to go and interact with the work and experience it so that you can see what they're doing. And that obviously, inviting the user to be right in front of the plinth creates a really intimate space. And I love the fact that Dean used this like open hand gesture and place the QR code there to like invite people to engage with the work. But it's interesting the use of the screens, because you're connecting the work and being invited to experience the Wedge-tailed eagle and his connection to country, but you're doing it through a screen. So you're not really there. You look up and you see the sky, but it's in a black box, and you know that the sky's out there, but you're looking at it through this intermediary medium. And another thing I just want to point out with these like really lovely photos that were taken at the Campbelltown Arts Centre is that when they first took photos for documentation, they just took pictures of the plinth and the video installation, and they were like, these photos don't really like capture the essence of the experience. And I suggested, from my experience, it's great to take pictures of people interacting with the piece, like get photos of their faces and what they can see on the screen. And I think it's really important for documentation and marketing or promotion of your work, because you're going to need it's really hard to capture things in VR and AR because, it doesn't render properly on the screen. So you have to be quite creative with how you capture the experience so that you can then share it with other people and kind of describe what is almost indescribable if you don't go and, do it yourself. So in terms of lessons on process, from this experience but other works that I've worked on, creative technologists and interdisciplinary artists have a great skill set and are honestly the pioneers in this emerging technologies. I've had someone look at my CV and say, that's a bit of a dog's breakfast. And I'm like, I prefer to think of myself as a unicorn, I've got all these disparate skills and experiences and, not many people have that skill set. So the other thing I would say is to consider the audience or the multiple audiences. In this case, it was in real life, but also online, and think about that in terms of user experience and how they're going to approach it and interact with it. One of the fabulous things working with Dean is he had a real appreciation for the opportunities, challenges, and the limitations posed in that technology. So he wasn't really it has to be like this when we explained why the technology wouldn't be ideal for it. And in that way, he had a real flexibility in his approach. And conversely, Lisa and I did what we could to make sure that we could build and create what he had envisaged. Testing throughout the process, it's honestly never too early to test. And if you can only change one thing at a time in between testings, that's really great, because then you know what broke it. If you try to do too many changes in one round, then you'll never know what broke, and then you have to go back 3 steps. So that's another tip. As I said, documenting the process. So if you have, whether it's email or Slack or Discord, just sticking to the one platform so you have a place in a repository for all your materials. And also, when working with technology, you've got to consider the long-term process of maintaining and archiving your work. So definitely important to think about that. And in terms of some guiding questions that I wanted to put up here, if you are interested in working in this medium, is thinking about how you can collaborate and work together with a team and start with a shared understanding of that vision or narrative. So whether it's a mood board or some reference images or examples of your previous work that you can share with your collaborators, just so that they understand what you mean by certain terms and certain tools or certain emotions that you want to evoke in the experience. How can you create a common language between people working traditionally in technology and people traditionally from an arts sector background? And from an audience perspective, how is it intended that they approach and interact with your work? So I understand that a lot of art can be very open-ended and you want to leave it to your audience to kind of make their own interpretation. But sometimes with technology, you do need to step them through at least the very beginning of the experience. Like, how do they use their mobile phone? Are they supposed to stand here during the whole experience, or should they stop and wait for the equal to return, and things like that? And how do you guide that experience? How do you build that world? And tying it back to the idea of narrative design, it's essentially about telling a story. And the key to this process is the idea of choices in the medium that you work with. In things like video games and branching narratives, we're asking the player to make a choice to form that story. And there are explicit choices that they can make to shape that story. However, in artworks like this, narrative is also about the choices that you make as the artist and the collaborative team have in creating that work. And those choices reflect your intention and your desire of how that work will be created and the ways in which the audience will view and experience their work. So that's the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. This is a QR code to my website, so I share a lot of information about mixed reality, and I have a monthly newsletter that goes out that just shares some of the projects that I'm working with and some of the tools that I recommend or I use, especially for people in creative industries. So there's a lot of material out there for people who already work with technology, but not so much for people who are new to this space. So if you're interested, you can follow that. And I have a podcast coming out later in the year. So thank you.